Greetings. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. I'm Lexi Eve, and welcome back to another Walk Magick video. So today I've got something special for you, and that is the subject of invisibility. Before we begin, I just want to mention, forgive my voice. I'm coming over a pretty bad cold from last week, so I'm past the worst of it, but yeah, if my voice is a little raspy today, that's why. So for myself, the most notable sources on invisibility are the following. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, the Z.2 Document. Crowley's 1900 Order of the Lamp of Invisible Light, which was founded in Mexico City by Crowley and Don Jesus Medina. And Crowley talking about invisibility in his autobiography, Confessions. In this video, I'll talk about all of that, as well as a few more personal experiences with invisibility. Magic, while it's at its best when used in a highly polished and sophisticated ritual form, it can also be done by sheer will alone. So, I'll be giving many examples of how to use this particular power today in this video. So we now have a source-driven basis for this lecture. What I'm thinking of doing is alternating between ritual analysis and storytelling. Figure that way we switch it up back and forth, and hopefully we'll keep the talk fresh. So let's begin. Looking at the Golden Dawn book, particularly I use now the 7th edition version, which is edited by Greer. Not only does it have the Z.2 document and a full example ritual based off the Z.2 document, but in the Z.3 document in Book 5, we get a quick note towards the end of the document from the symbolism of the admission of the candidate. Now, under the subsection, the sign of silence, we get some vital information about invisibility. Quote, "And as the sign of the enterer represents attack, so does the sign of silence represent defense thereto, as a shield is a defense against the sword. From this sign is a formula of invisibility derived," end quote. So I have a full video about the sign of silence and the sign of the enterer on this channel, but I did not speak about this aspect of it yet. The sign of silence represents Hippocrates, the babe in the egg, the untapped infinite potential of the seed upon the lotus. Being unmanifested, it is closely linked with the concept of no thing, alternatively, the light, the divine light. This is a good place to mention that the divine light is a symbol which is not a light at all. It's beyond that. There is even the same idea that Crowley had in his formation of the lamp of invisible light. And as it says in Liber L, chapter 2, verses 50 and 51, quote, "Blue am I and gold in the light of my bride, but the red gleam is in my eyes, and my spangles are purple and green. Purple beyond purple, it is the light higher than eyesight," end quote. So the light higher than eyesight, it's talking about something that is not something seen, an invisible light. So what is this light, especially if it's so closely linked with Hippocrates and the sign of silence? So I talk a little bit about this in my video on astral travel. The best way I could describe it is by using physical things and then symbolic things. Going backwards in a sense, back to the source of creation. The sun was the most bright and glorious thing that the ancients knew of. It sustained the plants which fed them and their livestock, thus allowing life. It was worshipped as a symbol of God for its radiance and life-sustaining properties. Thus was the concept of the divine light probably thought up. In addition, the ancients must have known about the astral light, as it has not only always existed, but we see ideas of it in many cultures under various names. And though it was called other things before it was called astral light, the Greek term eventually stuck with it, and that's what we use today, astral meaning stars. So it's a light of a different sort. It's not physical, yet with proper training, it can be seen and worked with. This must have brought the ancients to the conclusion that it was the symbol of the source of creation on a higher plane than the physical, and yet lower than the highest. If the sun gave life, as a purely physical thing of radiance, and the astral light then was a medium between the physical and purely spiritual. Well, as Hermes thrice greatest came to posit, as above, so below, there must be a thing higher, of which the astral light is a lower reflection, just like the sun is a lower reflection of any astral or divine light on a physical level. Thus was probably thought up the divine light, the highest light, a purely invisible agent responsible for, or in some way linked to, creation. Here we arrive at what Crowley was pointing to with his lamp of invisible light. It is a light that guides all things, one that we cannot see, yet is there. By numerology, we call it the zero. By Kabbalah, the Ein Sof, the limitless light. It is the nothingness from whence all things came. And here we arrive at Hippocrates, the personification of the number zero, a potential beyond or perhaps before creation. It's the zero as positive 1 plus negative 1, equaling 0. Something akin to the Tao Te, an unknowable factor of influence from which can be drawn upon infinitely. So the invisible light, the highest, then brings us full circle back to Hippocrates, the babe, or the seed upon the lotus. With that in mind, it's no wonder then that Hippocrates is found on path 0 Ein Sof in the Magician's Tables, column 701 of 776.5, titled Egyptian Deities. Here then is a solid connection of the power of invisibility with the Kabbalistic zero, the Ein Sof, and Hippocrates. So, that already was a lot of dense information. So let's pause here for a first short story. Now, this is my own experience with invisibility, and it takes place in about 2016, as I was awkwardly transitioning from male to female with the use of estrogen tablets. So keep in mind, I grew up in a very homophobic family and neighborhood. The idea of trans being different from gay was not even in anybody's, periphery or vocabulary. It was just none of that was okay, not acceptable. Even when I was a teenager, I tried coming out as bisexual, and that got me jumped 4 or 5 times. I couldn't really leave my house, and so I ended up going back in the closet and saying, no, I never said that I was bisexual. I never tried coming out. Somebody made that up to slander me, and I had to fight my way back into the good graces of everybody I knew who was my age in Brooklyn. So it was very traumatic, and it forced me back into the closet, and my family was, on the most part, was no more accepting. My mom's still not really there in my life for many reasons, but one of the major ones, because she's not fully accepting of my gender identity and who I am, so I don't really need that in my life today. But I say all that to say, it made my transitioning very, very difficult, especially on an internal level. I had to go through many a process of really accepting that it's okay for me to be who I am, and actualizing my gender identity was, pretty traumatic. So as I was getting onto estrogen, I was in college, and I was on estrogen for almost a year before I finally made the clothing switch and came out full time. Now, during that period of, 9 months to a year of taking estrogen, physical effects started to take place, and I started to look less masculine and more feminine. And I just, every time I left my house, I was so uncomfortable. It eventually did get better. I'm fully good with myself now, but I had to go through a process where, especially getting closer to that 1 year period where I planned on, in between college classes, changing my name and then transitioning fully. I didn't want people to see me. I was very awkward. I was scared every time I left my house. I was harassed multiple times by pedestrians that I didn't even know. People that did know me started to shun me. People that said they supported me stopped answering phone calls. I lost a lot of people. People who were really close to me at one point just thought that they would be okay with me being who I am, and then as soon as they saw, oh, this is a trans person, oh, I can't be around this, all of their shit got kicked up, and it removed a lot of people from my life, and all of that hurt. let alone the fact I was so insecure and I didn't want people to see me. I was just so scared of everyone and everything. I was terrified of my own shadow in regards to my gender identity in that early phase of transitioning. So one thing I came to do, well, I'll share this. I've said this before. I used Liber Oz almost like a mantra. You know, man has the right to dress as he will. And I would repeat that to myself, especially once I made the clothing switch. Every time I was about to open my door and leave my house, I had to like muster up the courage to go outside because I was so scared that I would get into some type of conflict just with some asshole who wanted to harass a gay person because of their own, I don't know, insecurities or social indoctrination. And besides for Libre Oz, what also helped me in that early phase of transitioning where I didn't want people to see me because I couldn't tell, wait, are they seeing me as a woman and maybe checking me out? Or are they looking at me as a trans person and it's just going to lead towards anger or hostility because they feel like I'm tricking them? And if they look at me now, they feel like, oh, that makes them gay or something. And that's not okay. So then they respond with aggression. So what I ended up doing was adapting the Rosy Cross ritual from the Golden Dawn. So if you're not familiar with this, it's similar in effect to the LBRP, but I'll just read a little blurb about the from the Golden Dawn book. It's called The Uses of the Rose Cross Ritual. Quote, it encloses the aura with the protection against outside influences. It is like a veil. The pentagrams protect, but they also light up the astral and make entities aware of you. They are more positive for magical working. When much distracted, use the pentagrams to banish and the rose cross to maintain peace. End quote. So I had done the rose cross ritual many times. I plan on making a video about it on this channel. But what I ended up doing was, if I started to feel insecure as I was outside commuting or going about my business, I would find somewhere like a nearby park and I would do the rose cross ritual, but I would add a little mental intention of reinforcing that shroud, that veil, like it said it is like a veil. I would reinforce that veil with either a fog or a translucency, like a window, so that light would pass through. And how invisibility works is it doesn't make you physically unseen, but what it does is it distracts. So people are not able to look at you, in which they don't know you're there. So it's like you're invisible. So when you do this invisibility rituals, you're actually affecting the psyche of people near you so that they almost ignore you and they can't look your way. You're kind of creating a mental repellent so that people can't look at you. Thus, you're invisible in that sense. So you're affecting people's minds in that way. So I would do this rose cross ritual with a little extra to almost repel the mental attitude, the mental perceptions of anybody that would come close to me. And I would especially reinforce this idea as I was walking by people after this ritual was completed. And so I would feel really insecure. I would stop, I would do the rose cross ritual, and then I would really focus on making sure, projecting like the idea of don't look at me. So it's hard to describe. It's more like a mental feeling of every time somebody would come pass by or close to me, push that projected mental idea or feeling towards them and force their eyes to look away or turn around or, and so people wouldn't see me. And I would actually look directly at them and they would not look up or look in my direction. And that made me feel safe for the first like 6 months of early transitioning. Like, I don't know, 7 or 8 months into hormones until, I don't know, about 6 months into fully transitioning after that, where I made the clothing switch and my old name was gone. I was now Lexi full time, and that was it. So it was like a 6 month process where anytime I'd get really insecure, I would do this ritual, and it worked. I would particularly stare, notice, and journal that, noting had anybody looked at me. And on the most part, there might have been 1 or 2 people that might have glanced my way, almost looking through me as opposed to at me. And the rest of people I would pass by on busy streets would take no notice of me. And that made me feel really safe. So this was how I used it, invisibility, quite frequently in early transitioning. That's just one story. I'm going to share something else later on. But going back to the Golden Dawn book by Regardi now. So section 3 of the Z2 document, there we could find a skeleton key for an invisibility ritual. There's also an example ritual in the same book which was constructed upon this skeleton key. But instead of using it, we're going to look at Crowley's invisibility ritual from the Order of the Lamp of Invisible Light, which he started again in 1900. So the verses of this invisibility skeleton key are labeled A through W, so it's quite long. What I'm going to do is just pluck out a couple of verses and explain these key components so that you get an idea of how to construct a ritual around this skeleton key. So line A states, quote, "the shroud of concealment," end quote. So this indicates your body of light, the egg-shaped aura which surrounds each and every person's body. This egg, in my opinion, corresponds with the element of spirit. Especially, it reminds me of the tattva of the Hindu system, which are the Hindu elements. It's like a black egg, black oval shape. So that's also spirit. So the aura around a person reminds me of that tattva. So in my opinion, the aura corresponds very closely with spirit. And it can be activated in numerous ways. So for line A, you could do things as simple as the middle pillar exercise, to as complex as using the first and second Enochian keys, or as you'll see in Crowley's ritual later on in the ritual, he constructs an invocation based around the Tablet of Union. Well, you could actually use that Tablet of Union invocation for line A if you so chose, because Tablet of Union corresponds with spirit. The point is, you want to build up a spiritual current of energy in and around you, activating your psychic centers and body of light. Skipping ahead to line C, quote, "the guards of concealment," end quote. Here, powers are called forth which have the power to conceal one, but also to fortify your concealment, so that what you have done in this ritual does not falter. These powers should correspond with such ideas as night, darkness, or fog. Avoid using something like utter brightness, which will blind, as that will not necessarily work for invisibility, but rather work by blinding the person viewing you so that one is obscured rather than concealed. In that case, your presence there would be known, though concealed, but that's an effect that we're not trying to create. So think of the tables of correspondences, and here you could choose such angels, deities, or divine names, and or words of power, which meet the parameters of fortifying your concealment, so the guards of concealment. So think about whatever corresponds with night, darkness, especially Saturnian forces. Let me pause here and say that I'm also assuming that one knows how not only to use the magician's tables, but say when intoning words of power, that you, the listener, as a magician, knows how to properly unite with the word you're intoning, as well as invoke it, both internally and to your ritual space. Merely humming a word loudly will have only a limited effect. Just as calling a deity without knowledge of invocation will probably not make the deity enter your temple. Empty words and gestures are what I'm talking about. All movements and every spoken word in a ritual must be thought out completely while crafting a rite, and then one must know how to get the effect from said ritual that they desire at the correct time. For beginners, I suggest going to Physical Clairvoyance from Liber E. That text cannot be overlooked. With dedication to it, one will inevitably become accustomed to the feel of the elements, planets, and zodiac via the tarot cards. And then, knowing how each feels, it makes calling them later on so much easier. Knowing how they feel from having completed Liber E goes a long way to knowing how they feel when they are present. It is a surefire way to know that your intonation and invocations are successful. In short, you have to know how to make your words and movements carry the magical pulse to call powers to your temple and then get them to do what you need. So to continue with the skeleton key, line D, quote, "the astral light should be molded into the shroud," end quote. This line is straightforward. It could be as simple as mentally doing it, or as complex as writing a full page of spoken verses and instructional gestures, as well as implementing various magical weapons. Depending upon the ritual you are crafting, you can decide to use a number of weapons at this moment, whether the wand or lamp or outer robe of concealment, for instance. Just make sure that as you craft a ritual, everything in it is harmonious. Every ritual should have a kind of flow to it. It's no good if you use Saturn's darkness in line C and then solar implements in line D. Now, there are, of course, ways to make such a ritual as that work, but it's easier to keep things simpatico. Line G begins to formulate the Shroud of Invisibility by, quote, consecration with water and fire so that their vapor may begin to form a basis for the shroud, end quote. And then line H is a spoken affirmation of the shroud. Word in ritual is extremely important. What a magician says is what the magician manifests. Thought, word, and deed are the three most important tools in magic, and lines G and H use all three of these. Thought, word, and deed. Basically, what you're going to do is visualize a sort of translucent veil out of astral light, which surrounds you as a magician and cloaks you. You are creating this veil, which then affects the minds of those whom you pass by, and it causes their eyes to avert from you. Their minds are affected by the invoked forces, and essentially distracts them, so that they look away from you, and that you pass by unseen. Now, keep in mind, right, as this line G says, consecration with water and fire, what you're doing is actually using blessed water and either blessed incense smoke or candlelight to consecrate this veil, this shroud that you've crafted on the astral plane. Fire and water together make air, right? So you could use these two substances and visualize both of them touching your aura, creating a fog-like substance, which helps you maintain that invisibility, maintain that concealment. Then, skipping past many other invocations and dialogues, we're going to go from line H all the way to line W. So, the final line must be performed when you are finished using your shroud out of wherever you're going to go use it. Basically, light is conjured, which is going to dispel the shroud. Think of it like the sun rising in the morning, which dissipates a fog with its radiance. That's the effect that you want to get at this point. We're going to look at how to write such a verse later on, but for now, I'll share the warning written in line W against leaving up the shroud. Quote, but on no account must that shroud of awful mystery be left without such disintegration, seeing that it would speedily attract an occupant, which would become a terrible vampire preying upon him who had called it into being, end quote. Most magic has a shell life of 24 to 48 hours. After that, it then either disintegrates, or in this case, because you're using much more potent forces, it will require energy to be sustained. Well, that energy will end up being taken from the magician in order to keep the shroud functioning. You don't want to be in the scenario, as it can deplete your energy levels and cause permanent damage, even death. Just non-stop draining you until there's really nothing left. You'll actually turn gray, feel sickly, sleepy, and yeah, you don't want to be in that situation. Here, now let me share a story about Crowley and invisibility. So this is taken from the Confessions. We'll begin with a note on invisibility written about his time in Mexico City while operating his Order of the Lamp of Invisible Light. Quote, I worked also at acquiring the power of invisibility. I reached the point where my physical reflection in a mirror became faint and flickering. It gave very much the effect of the interrupted images of the cinematograph in its early days. But the real secret of invisibility is not concerned with the laws of optics at all. The trick is to prevent people noticing you when they would normally do so. In this, I was quite successful. For example, I was able to take a walk in the street in a golden crown and scarlet robe without attracting attention, end quote. So what's happening here? Talking about invisibility. How do we make this magical effect? There are two main methods that I hold, both equally valid in my opinion. Number one, by working upon one's own body of light, you create a veil that is like a curved glass. It bends astral light so that the person viewing you sees that which is behind you, creating the illusion of invisibility. 2. You affect the mind of the person viewing you. This can be done by making a veil or blockade around you in your mind's eye. You then force the psyche of the viewer to look away from you so that they become oblivious to your presence. In either case, the result is the same. You remain undetected in the presence of another person. Consider also that consciousness exists in all particles. The magician can move their consciousness anywhere because their consciousness is the same consciousness that already exists there. Everything is God. Matter is composed also of spaced out particles, and thus matter is about 99% empty space. On an even more subtle level, everything is made of that divine light. Now, I propose a magician skilled enough can control that divine light. They can then manipulate those particles outside of their body by moving their consciousness there and controlling it, as if it were but an extension of their body. Now, on these grounds, theoretically, one can manipulate matter, shifting that single percentile and causing an item, or even themselves, to turn into a gossamer-like fog and then disappear altogether. Alternatively, one should theoretically be able to manipulate the light they are composed of, and thereby force their matter into a clear, absolutely see-through shape, like hermetic air, of which we are also partly composed. But these last two seem impossible at our present state of evolution, though perhaps one day will be possible. So I digress. On Crowley and invisibility. In the Temple of Solomon the King, you can read Crowley's transcribed records of experiments with invisibility, especially those pertaining to his order Lil. For now, here is a story. When he was in India, he was walking the streets at night and was jumped. He wound up with his back against a wall in an alley and ended up shooting and killing one of the men jumping him. He then claims to have turned himself invisible. He was seen by pedestrians prior to the shooting, and they saw him kill the man. Yet, he then blinked out of sight and walked away calmly. He walked through the streets and crowds of roused people who were all looking for an Englishman, of which he claims to have been the only one around that part of the entire city. Yet, no one can see him walk by, despite the fact he was holding the exact pistol he used in his hand out in the open. Now, there could be any number of variables, from tension, commotion, to the scared mental attitudes of everyone around that night, which caused him not to be seen. Or it could just be that the sheer need and will to disappear was so great on the part of Crowley that he affected invisibility with ease. For myself, I know that when need is great within oneself, affecting magic always becomes as easy as snapping my fingers. It's remarkable. I'll share a story exactly like this of my own later on. Still on Crowley, he claims in the Confessions and several other books that sometimes, due to his Lil workings of invisibility, and perhaps his years of yoga training, that sometimes while walking with students, they would see him phase in and out of physical appearance to an utterly invisible state. Notably, he attributes this to a prelude to dhyana. Think about how, like, when one is doing a sauna, you will sweat profusely, despite the fact you're using little to no energy. Or how in a sauna, first one's muscles will begin to twitch, then their whole body will jerk without their knowing. So those are preludes to a perfect state of muscle rigidity. After that, when you achieve really perfect muscle rigidity, you'll actually end up becoming weightless, and it's said that at that point one can rise up off their seat and float into the air. So Crowley actually witnessed Alan Bennett in a sauna for several hours, and when Crowley came back to check on his friend, Bennett was leaning on the edge of his leg in dragon posture at a diagonal angle. Crowley claims to have shifted his friend back to an upright posture, noting that Bennett was not only completely unaware Crowley had moved him from an impossible angle, but that Bennett was stiff as a board and basically weightless. Any longer on his own, and it's possible Bennett may have risen right off the ground. So with that last little bit said about Crowley, let's look at his invisibility ritual from the Order of the Lamp of Invisible Light. So this is taken from the Book of the Spirit of the Living God. You could find it online, you could find it in Temple of Solomon the King in the Equinox. Okay, so this ritual of invisibility is in total 13 pages, and I'm not going to go through the entire ritual. Instead, I'm going to talk about the gist of each part, quoting only necessary bits so that we can understand what is going on in it, and that you could use it if you needed to. A PDF of it is available in the description below. It is mostly a complete ritual, though one or two parts of it still require you to write your own verse. The rest can be used as is. It begins with a few lines, which are similar to those found in Liber Israfel and Pyramidos. Like the speech and the silence, the words against the son of night, etc., etc. But these opening lines instead say, the beginning of the silence, the dwelling of the darkness, the formulation of the shroud, the inmost light, the sign of defense and protection, the closing of the mouths of the crocodiles, the fear upon the dwellers of water, the radiant youth of the Lord, the rising from the lotus of the floods, the habitation of the palace of safety, the understanding of the peace of God. End quote. So, the first part of this ritual is called the particular exordium. The second part is an exorcism. Now, not like an exorcism in the Roman Catholic Church or something like that, not removing evil spirits. More like how in the Book of the Law, chapter 2, Hadith says, I am the magician and the exorcist. It's more like being able to control spiritual energy, spiritual matter, the astral light, anything magically in that sense. Alright? So, going back to this first part, which I quoted, it reads much like a skeleton key of the entire operation which is gonna come. You can use each line to activate energies as you say them. For example, since invisibility corresponds closely with Hippocrates, upon saying the very first line, the beginning of the silence, I would recommend giving the sign of silence to fortify your body of light around you. Take that time to sit in that pose for at least a few seconds and do that visualization. Line 2, the dwelling of the darkness. You can take a second to visualize darkness cloaking your aura so that it goes from bright light to dim to pitch dark. Line 3, the formulation of the shroud. Take a second to visualize the shroud like a veil of fog surrounding you. And with some thought, you can figure out how to use each line differently. Like in the third to last line, the rising from the lotus of the floods. I would recommend again giving the sign of silence, but now assume the form of Hippocrates perched upon the lotus. In this case, you begin using the formula of Ein Sof, the Kabbalistic zero, as positive 1 plus negative 1. You become a source of potentiality, and an invisible one at that. Magick, in the PDF, it's from Liber Pyramidos by Magick. Magick notes that all of this ritual is taken from the Golden Dawn Z.2 Document, as I mentioned much earlier. If you go through the PDF, especially this part, David Magick has great notes all throughout it, which are really cool, and definitely you'll get a lot from if you haven't read that book before. The ritual continues. Quote, all this is the knowledge of Horpocrates, unto whom be the glory forever and ever, world without end. The usual banishings, consecrations, etc. are performed in temple of 0 equals 0. The forces of spirit are first invoked by the supreme ritual of the pentagram and the Enochian keys. Add hexagram ritual of Bina and her invocation. End quote. So that first part, all this knowledge of Horpocrates, blah blah blah, you say that first line aloud. Then the basic temple setup is performed. So you use salt water for purification, incense for consecration, LBRP, LBRH, etc., etc. You could check Regardie's Golden Dawn book for the opening of the Neophyte grade if you're unfamiliar with it, because you could use parts of that. Then spirit is invoked with the supreme invocation ritual of the pentagram. And keep in mind, I have a video about how to use that ritual on this channel, if you haven't seen that before, if you haven't done it before. Then this part of the ritual says you use Enochian keys. I suggest using the first and second keys, which correspond closely with spirit. After that, the hexagram ritual of Saturn is employed, as well as an invocation of the divine name of Binah, Yod-He-Vav-He Elohim. Here you have to write your own verse. In the 7th edition of the Golden Dawn book, there is an example ritual written in the back of the book, which I said uses the skeleton key of the Z.2 document, and its opening portion has an invocation of this very nature for Yod-He-Vav-He Elohim. Here I'm going to quote it. It's about a long paragraph, so just bear with me. Though keep in mind, you can certainly write your own for this part. Quote, Lady of darkness, who dwellest in the night, to which no man can approach, wherein is mystery and depth, unthinkable and awful silence, I beseech thee in thy name, Shekinah and Aima Elohim, to grant thine aid unto the highest aspirations of my soul, and clothe me about with thine ineffable mystery. I implore thee to grant unto me the presence of thy archangel, Zadkiel, the great prince of spiritual initiation through suffering, and of spiritual strife against evil, to formulate about me a shroud of concealment. O ye strong and mighty ones of the sphere of Shabbatai, ye our limb, I conjure ye by the mighty name of Yod-He-Vav-He Elohim, the divine ruler of Binah, and by the name of Zadkiel, your archangel, aid me with your power in your office to a place of veil between me and all things belonging to the outer and material world. Clothe me with the veil woven from that silent darkness which surrounds your abode of eternal rest in the sphere of Shabbatai. End quote. After all this is a 3.5-page invocation of Hor-Po-Krat-Is, though this invocation also calls forth Tahuti, Mod, Adonai, various parts of the Tree of Life, and many divine names, as well as a host of other things. But the main focus throughout the entire invocation is upon Hippocrates, most especially. Let me just give you a taste of it, as I always love how Crowley writes his ritual verses. Quote, Hor-Po-Krat-Is, thou nameless child of the eternities, bring me to thee, that I may be defended in this work of art. Thou, the center in the silence, light shrouded in darkness is thy name, the celestial fire is thy father, thy mother the celestial sea. Thou art the equilibrium of the all, and thou art Lord against the face of the dwellers within the waters. End quote. At the end of this 3-page invocation, it states, quote, Let formulate the idea of becoming invisible. Imagine the results of success, then say, Let the shroud of concealment encircle me at a distance of 10 inches from the physical body. Let the sphere be consecrated with water and with fire. You do that part. You actually, again, consecrate with water and fire. Continue saying, O Aramuth, and O Thou Ashnieth. Remember, we did those 2 grade signs, fire and water? So here they're used as polarities, balancing each other. I invoke and beseech you, let the vapor of this water and of this fire be as a basis on the material plane for the formation of this shroud of art. Then you're going to mentally formulate the shroud. So, here is the main point of the ritual. This is what everything has led up to in this climax. You have invoked a host of various forces, all for the purpose of invisibility. In this section, you need to be able to astrally cause a veil of fog or any type of thin, translucent veil of invisibility, whatever you feel comfortable with, that you like to visualize, surrounding you. Again, you use salt water and either incense or candlelight to consecrate this veil, which you have visualized. Fire and water being the elements to make fog when combined. Then you need to make your body of light itself turn into this fog, so that there is no difference between you and it. After this is a proclamation of one's grade and authority to use this power, followed by a statement of intention and a formal taking of an oath so that you will not abuse this power. What this does is allows the higher to bestow upon you the power to use it, because you have sworn to use your powers justly and in accordance with not only your will, but on behalf of the entire universe. This lends you a greater power than any one individual can possess on their own, as the entire universe is now backing you up and lending you its strength. From here are a couple of shorter conjurations, and we're basically 3/4 of the way complete. And like I said, these last 5 pages are called the Potent Exorcism. Quote, "Come unto me, O shroud of darkness of night. I conjure ye, O particles of darkness, that ye unfold me, as a guard and shroud of utter silence and of mystery." End quote. This is followed by an invocation of spirit via the names of the Tablet of Union. Then a prolonged conjuration which uses many mental images combined with words spoken. Many of these images pertain to colors that are reminiscent of twilight, darkness, and night. By doing this, you are tuning your mind magically to things which conceal, such as shadows and the darkness of nighttime. Thus, your mind will be consciously and unconsciously focused upon concepts which give a person invisibility, thereby affecting you in subtle, spiritual, and magical ways. There are then some circumambulations, a few more gestures, some more verses spoken, which are of the same sorts, and we're basically almost done. At this part, you're then going to do that thing from the Golden Dawn where you knock saying cobs, pect, conks, pax, light, in, extension. And so it's spoken with knocks, marking the near completion of the rite. Then there's an interesting astral instruction that is written to be done by the magician here. Quote, "Go to the pillars, give signs and words, with the sign of Horus, project your whole will so as to realize the self fading out." So you write whatever you feel like saying there. It should be short because you're going to do it in the sign of the Emperor, and it should pertain to invisibility. The effect will be that the physical body will become gradually and partially invisible, as though a veil or cloud were coming between it and thee. Divine ecstasy will follow, but no loss of self-control. With sign of silence, use Horpokrat formula and vibrate the grand word. Repeat concentration and mystic circumambulation. So as you can see, an assumption of Hippocrates becomes central at this point astrally. But note how closely linked Hippocrates is with Ra Horkui, the two halves that, when united, make zero. The pillars help give us an idea of the temple setup, which is mentioned at the beginning, and is supposed to be like the Golden Dawn Neophyte Temple. So you could see that image on your screen of what that looks like. Of course, you could do your own temple. You could adapt this as need be, especially if you're not a Golden Dawn magician formally. If you haven't gone through these initiations, you can use different things. I recommend having some type of black and white pillar if possible, but there are many ways to adapt the Neophyte Temple to your needs. And then at the very end it says the grand word is vibrated, and I assume that is Muaum, M-U-A-U-M. A word employed years later again by Crowley in his AA Neophyte ritual Liber Pyramidos. It's basically similar in meaning to the Hindu Om, the sound of creation, which again reminds us Kabbalistically of Ein Sof, the spark of creation, where creation came from. At this point, you may leave and go about your business completely invisible in the world. But it is paramount that when you are finished with your business, you come back to your temple space and finish this rite, which is composed of 2 very short conjurations of Binah, the Great Mother, and its divine name, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh Elohim, provided at the end of this text in the PDF. It then finally ends with an adapted version of the license to depart. And you're done. Now, this is a very masterful way of performing magic. To use it correctly and efficiently takes not only years of study and practice, but serious levels of magical discipline to really understand all of the nuances employed. While it is highly effective for those who are trained and can actually use it, I realize not everyone is. But there are less sophisticated ways to get magical effects, though they are not as potent unless the individual has dire need and innate internal aptitude to use such powers. And that's usually people who have been doing magic in previous incarnations. Otherwise, it is better to go through the years of training and then use such respectable rituals as this, which I've just abbreviated. So that's Crowley's Lamp of Invisible Light invisibility ritual, which again comes from the Z.2 documents from the Golden Dawn. So with that said, I want to now switch off to my second and last story about invisibility, which takes place a few years prior, when I was still seeking magic, though at the time I did not have any formal training, and I did not have as much theoretical knowledge as I do now. In fact, it was 2013 and I was in the state penitentiary. I had a low criminal charge of sale of LSD to an undercover cop at a rave, and if you've listened to my channel for a long time, I've talked about this. I did 2 years upstate, and in that time, I was really, really seeking magic and going through all types of spirituality and doing various meditations, etc., etc. I've spoken about that elsewhere. This story is about invisibility, and it was pretty intense. And it showed me, wow, like there's stuff that you can do with magic that was really cool. I was not yet in Wicca, so I didn't even have the concept of ritual magic. I just knew how to use will and control energy. And what ended up happening was, because I had a low grade charge, I was given outside clearance, which is not really outside. You go through a fenced alleyway to a cooking facility where you cook food for hospitals and institutions. And I was in the vegetable room, where you spend your day lifting 50-pound bags of vegetables and dumping them into various machines that either peel certain vegetables or chop them, wash them. And so it's also a refrigerator, because they need to be cold so that they don't heat up and rot. So you're standing inside a refrigerator lifting 50 to 100-pound bags or bins of vegetables all day, freezing. And after a couple of months, I just got tired. My back was hurting. Actually, my thumb still is injured from lifting these bags every day, one after another, after another, after another. So I had a couple of injuries and I wanted out. Now, the problem is, once you're given that outside clearance and that job, you get paid better, and you're in a segregated part of the jail, which you're treated a little bit better because you're now technically an employee of the state, which you're not getting paid that great. You're getting paid about, I forget if it was like $50 every 2 weeks or something, which is at least double any other job in the facility. So yeah, and you get perks. You could take food back to your house and you could cook real stuff. You had stoves in that house. It was a lot better treatment. However, I did not like that part of the facility, and I was getting injured and I was freezing and I hated it. Once you're there, you're not allowed to quit that job. You're doing that job for the entire time that you're in that prison. So unless they move you to another jail, which randomly happens sometimes, rarely, but sometimes, you're stuck with that job. I wanted to get the hell out of there, and I was so pissed. So I was trying to weasel my way out in multiple ways. And one day I tried telling them, hey, listen, I'm injured. I can't work this job. They didn't care. Get back on your job. I tried talking to my boss, who was a cook, not a cop. And he said, I'm sorry, there's nothing I can do for you. So after trying the correct chains to get out, even going to the people who assign jobs in a different part of the jail, telling them, they're like, nope, there's nothing wrong with you. You go back to work. You're not getting out of that job. I was pissed. And I was just spewing energy and anger. And so on this particular day where I really wanted to get out of this job, I went into the outside clearance facility, the cooking facility, just spewing really pissed off energy, just like spewing energy, just radiating. And matter of fact, it was so much energy I was releasing, it affected my cook who oversaw the vegetable room. That man had never taken a day off in his, I forget, 7 to 10 years of working that job. Yet on his way to work, he suddenly came down with the flu and got sick, had to turn home and take the day off. Next day, he was fine. So if he had some type of severe cold that caused him to take off and it just disappeared, I know it was because of what I was spewing energy-wise. So I went into the facility, and first I put up a mental shroud. It was almost like a gate that I could see around my body, and that gate was down. And anytime somebody would come close to me, they could not see me through that gate. It was like a steel door, right? Like a big steel grate around my whole entire body. Boom, down. And as long as it was down, I knew nobody could see me. Now, there are officers in there. There was a substitute cook. None of them looked at me. Now, if you're not doing a job, there's 4 or 5 different jobs. As long as you're doing one of those, nobody messes with you. You do your job, and then several hours later, you go back to your house. I was literally sitting down, just spewing energy, maintaining that field, that door down, for at least a half hour, 40 minutes, and just there was literally, I remember a cop standing right in front of me, and anytime he tried to like look my way, he couldn't, and he would just turn his back to me again. And he was literally standing a foot away from me, and I'm sitting down, staring at him, mentally fortifying this shroud, and he couldn't look at me. Finally, after about 45 minutes, I said, okay, we're gonna start to do some other stuff. The amount of energy that I was spewing started to affect other less stable people that were in the facility. So there was another room that would cut meat, and so because they had knives, they were in a very small room with a table, a sterile room with a sterile butcher's table, and they were just cutting beef and stuff like that. One of those guys was a very unstable young man, and he was so affected, and he was a sweet guy normally, but he was just feeling my energy that he got angry, and he almost started a fight with his coworker. His coworker was also a sort of magician and kind of touched his chest and said, hey, you're not gonna, and the guy, don't touch me, don't touch me. And he said, hey, and he touched his chest again, relax, relax, and was like kind of spewing calm energy every time he touched. And the guy's like, don't effing touch me. And then he's like, you know what you need? What do I need? You need a hug. And the guy just like melted, and he gave him a hug, and they went back to work. So thank God, because he was a friend of mine that did that, and he was also a magician. They're not a trained one, just sort of intuitive magician. So that was affected. The other coworkers in the vegetable room were just so anxious for no reason. They're dropping stuff, things are flying everywhere. 2 machines broke down for different vegetables. So it was just absolute chaos. Finally, I said, okay, it's enough. I'm going to release this shroud. And I saw the gate go up, and literally in a second, suddenly the cop turned around and sees me sitting down and looks at me. Had his back to me for a good 4 or 5 minutes, but suddenly, as soon as I remove this shroud of invisibility, he suddenly is able and immediately looks at me. He's like, hey, are you new? And I said, yeah, I'm new, which I was not. I was there for months, and the guy saw me plenty of times, yet I guess I just affected him mentally in that way where it's like he didn't know what was happening, and he's just reacting to the energy I'm still spewing out. And he's like, oh, do you know what to be doing? I said, no, I'm waiting for instruction. Like a smart ass, but in a sweet way. Said he didn't know I was being kind of rambunctious. And he said, oh, okay, well, why don't you do that machine? And so I relieve one of the guys. I'm like, hey, I'm going to take over that machine. And it was putting vegetables into a processor, and you're supposed to dump a barrel at a time, let them go through. It cuts them, and then you move the barrel full of cut vegetables, you put a fresh barrel, and then you start dumping more and more, and it chops them. Well, instead of pouring, I was standing there just doing one at a time, which ended up screwing up 2 weeks worth of food that didn't get out on time. So that was invisibility. Actually, I spewed so much energy that I ended up giving myself an opportunity. That same day, a drug testing raid happened in the jail in 2 houses, and the box is where you go when you commit an infraction, such as coming up with a positive drug test. So the box was full because they went through 2 houses and caught a bunch of people with dirty urines. Because the box was full, they could not put more people in there unless you had a very serious charge, like if you assaulted somebody or something along those lines. What I did was, I immediately, as soon as I heard that same day I'm still in the vegetable room, and I'm doing these vegetables one at a time, once I heard the box was now full, I said, this is my time to make my move. And so I immediately went to the captain, corrections officer, and said, listen, I'm injured and I can't work in this department anymore. I've been trying to get out of here. My back is hurting so bad I can't work here. He said, okay, are you sure? Because you're going to be written up and you're going to be in trouble for quitting this job. I said, yes, I understand. And so he says, okay, go wait in the break room where you would have your lunch. And I'm going to go find out how to get you out of here and what the next steps are, because now we have to write you up. So everything's in chaos still, mind you. And now I'm sitting in this side room and people are trying to talk to me. What happened? What's going? And I'm just like, don't talk to me because you're going to get me in trouble with all the gossip stuff. People always want to gossip and know what you're doing and what's going on in jail so that they could talk about you and whatever. It's recreation and ends up blowing up your spot if I say what's really going on and what my intentions are. So I'm trying to play it close to the cuff and just, oh, I'm injured. I can't talk right now. I just kept telling people I'm injured, I can't talk right now, even though I was fine. So eventually, a few minutes go by, that captain comes back, he says, okay, so listen, we've written you up, you're no longer working here. Um, Unfortunately, I can't take you to the box because it's full. So what we're going to do is put you on solid and cube confinement, and we're going to move you back to the intake house, and then we'll get you out of the working dorm that you were in, and we'll put you into another house in the jail. Um, I was like, oh, I tried to play like, oh, what a punishment. If I'm in cube confinement, that means I could still go to the yard for an hour a day at nighttime, and I could have people in the intake house still make my coffee for me, do this, I have my books, I have my radio, I'm just stuck in my cube. That's your box time. So I'm like, yes, I'm out of here and I'm not getting in trouble. Well, he's like, so I'm playing off like, oh no, it's cube confinement. Oh, that sucks. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. He's like, well, unless you want to go back to work. And I was like, no, 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 my back hurts. My back hurts. He's like, I didn't think so. Okay, well, come on. And so that was using invisibility. My workers would have also told me, hey, why are we doing the work and you're not in that room? They didn't approach me. Nobody looked at me. They couldn't understand what was going on, why machines are breaking, why they're dropping stuff, why. And then the cop, after 5 minutes, mind you, 45 minutes not working, and then 5 minutes of a cop standing right in front of me, a corrections officer, right in front of me, not able to look at me. The second I lifted that gate shroud that I had mentally fortified astrally, which I didn't know these terms, I was just doing it instinctively. Once I lifted that gate up, then the cop immediately turns around and looks at me. And so it was like, yeah, I could see exactly what Crowley's saying. Now, mind you, this was before I'd heard of Thelema, I'd never heard of the Hermetic, occultism, and magic. I was doing all of this instinctively, based on experiences I had while doing club drugs and meditating in the rave scene and talking to people in the rave scene who were not trained magicians. They were just, kind of having spiritual experiences through psychedelics. That was how I came into magic. Now I'm formally trained. I've had a teacher, I've had training, I've been in several orders, and I've done a lot of occult work. Now I have all this terminology. But we're talking 11 years ago, 11 and some change ago, when I didn't have this terminology I was just doing it instinctively. I formulated a shroud of invisibility so that literally people that were there could not see me because they couldn't look at me. I was mentally affecting their psyche through an astral means, through a visual I had created in my body of light. So that's invisibility. That's how you do it. In that case, it was sheer will and a dire need to get out of that job. Backed up, I have my moon is in Aries and my sun is in Leo, and I have a grand fire trine, so there's a lot of fiery energy. And the moon in Aries could be very emotionally. So when I get angry, I get very hot-headed. So in this case, I'm like, I don't want to be in this job, and I keep getting told, no, there's nothing you could do, there's nothing you could do, go back. Well, that anger came out. And so I know when I get angry, I can go into this spiritual warfare type state, and I'm very good at that because I know how to control it to a great extent. And I'm able to use that anger to propel my energy to get it to do what I need magically. So that works for me, and I know that about myself. And it's through experiences like that where I've been able to look back, introspect, tear apart this experience I had, analyze it, and see how did I do that and how did I make that work. And so now I'm able to see exactly what I did instinctively, what was going on there. Now I could do it through a Golden Dawn based ritual like I had abbreviated before, like Crowley's LIL ritual. I could do that today. I have the equipment, I have the temple setups, I know how to do all of that. Back then I had to operate instinctively. So yeah, invisibility works. People will not be able to look at you or see you if you have the aptitude to control those forces correctly and if you know what you're doing. If you're interested in this power, I hope that you try it out, experiment. Don't use this to hurt yourself, anybody, steal something. You're gonna pay for that. And the further you go along with magic, the more restricted you get. When you become an adept or a master, you're only able to do your will with magic. If you try as a newcomer, you could use magic and do all kinds of messed up stuff. You're gonna pay for it. You could manifest anything the hell you want, but that's because you don't have adepthood. You don't have training, and you don't actually know what you're doing. You're like a child playing with a knife or a fire. As you advance in magic, your oaths, your training, your will, it restricts you. You're not able to use this power to do things that you would have done otherwise. So that being said, yeah, this is invisibility. Don't do it for any wrong, malicious reasons. Use it to do your will if ever that happens. That's the safest way. So I'm gonna end this here. Love is the law, love under will. I'll see you on the next one. Peace.